This is Agnes Van Reyne. This is Bertha Russell. You know them from the Gilded Age. You may remember this elegant ensemble. And who could forget this iconic look? But are they accurate? We asked this fashion historian.
Hi, I'm Raisa Britannia, and I'm a fashion historian.
To walk us through what the Gilded Age got right and what they got mostly right about these looks.
The Gilded Age is an HBO original series that chronicles the drama that follows New York society at the end of the 19th century.
You may have heard of the famous time period coined by Mark Twain in 1873. But what exactly is the Gilded Age?
The Gilded Age refers to a period in American history that stretched from the end of the Civil War to the turn of the 20th century. This era was defined by rapid urbanization, technological advancement, and economic growth. But it was also marked by incredible wealth disparity. The opening title card places us in the year 1882. The show is set in New York City. On the show, the fictional Van Reyne and Russell families live across the street from each other on the corner of Fifth Avenue and East 61st Street.
Welcome to East 61st Street, Miss Marion.
This sets the scene for the long-standing feud between old and new money.
We only receive the old people in this house, not the new. Never the new.
Costume designer Kasia Walicka-Maimon heightened this social divide by creating a dramatic visual contrast between these two groups. The designer took advantage of the rich visual culture from the period and drew inspiration from this variety of primary sources, like paintings, photographs, fashion plates, and surviving garments.
What are fashion plates?
Fashion plates were the illustrations that were included in fashion magazines during the 19th century. It's very clear that Kasia researched fashion plates from the period because there are many costumes throughout the series that look like exact duplicates of styles that appeared in magazines. If you're a fashion enthusiast like me, you might have also recognized some of the costumes as replicas of existing garments from museum collections. Old money style was all about refinement and respectability.
So how well did the show showcase these differences? Let's get into the looks. First up, Mrs. Van Reyne's afternoon look.
This look appears in episode 1 and would be considered an afternoon ensemble. Christine Baranski plays Agnes Van Reyne, who is an imposing matriarch that represents the values of old New York.
You belong to old New York, my dear, and don't let anyone tell you different.
Agnes, along with her sister Ada and their niece Marion, is descended from the highly regarded Livingston line, but she does marry into the Van Reyne family for financial security.
You were allowed the pure and tranquil life of a spinster. I was not.
I'm very grateful.
As a member of the highest echelon of society, she would have adhered to a strict code of dress that governed a woman of her position. This included changing up to 5 times a day.
Hardly. You need 4 outfits a day at the minimum, decent jewels, and a full dance card.
Throughout the series, she's seen wearing a variety of ensembles, whether in the home or out for social gatherings.
Let's get into the layers, shall we? First up, the undergarments.
Women were required to wear several layers of undergarments during this period. We get a glimpse of Agnes's undergarments when she goes to visit her dressmaker for a fitting. The first layer would be the chemise, and this was the layer that was worn closest to the skin. Underneath, she would be wearing drawers or pantalettes, which were bloomer-like undergarments that were worn on the lower half of the body. As they had for centuries, women in this era were required to wear stockings.
Up next, the corset.
Corsets were structured foundation garments that sculpted the torso into the fashionable silhouette of the period.
I'm going up to change. I want to get out of this corset.
Up next, it's all about the bustle.
When it came to fashion in the 1870s and 1880s, it was all about the bustle. The bustle was a steel foundation garment that gave skirts of this period their unique shape. During this period, it was very fashionable to have a narrow waistline and a voluminous posterior. The bustle defined fashion during the 1870s and 1880s. But there was a brief period in the very late 70s and early 80s where it diminished in favor of a more streamlined silhouette. we see Agnes debating the evolution of bustle size with her dressmaker in her fitting.
I should point out that bustles are getting smaller for most people.
I am not most people.
Talk about iconic. Next up, petticoat.
Yup, we're still on underwear. The petticoat was a cotton skirt-like undergarment that provided an additional layer for warmth, volume, and modesty, which was a priority for ladies during this era.
And now, afternoon dress.
There were certain design features that would make a dress appropriate for morning, afternoon, or evening, such as neckline or sleeve length. For the afternoon, the sleeves could be shortened to reveal the forearm. But the chest had to remain covered, which would make this open neckline inaccurate. This is a rule not often adhered to in period costuming, and we see many characters throughout the series with exposed chests during the day. This would not have been acceptable, especially at this echelon of society. Dresses in the fashionable silhouette featured a sculpted bodice that dipped low in front and was fitted over the hips. The skirt would have fullness to accommodate the protruding bustle and additional decorations to emphasize the backside. Fashionable dress of the late 19th century is notable for its heavy ornamentation. In 1882, skirts for indoor wear tended to have a bit of a train, and we see Agnes drag hers through the dirt as she dramatically storms across the street to barge into the Russells' house. Dressing well was such an important part of society life that as soon as Marion arrives in New York, Agnes sends her straight to her dressmaker to get new clothes made.
First, we must attend to your clothes, my dear. You will go tomorrow with Ada to my dressmaker.
At this rate, I shall have more clothes than the Princess of Wales.
But if Mrs. Van Reyne insists.
Who am I to object?
That brings us to hair and makeup.
Agnes wears her hair in a braided updo, which is totally accurate, but comes across as a little more severe, especially in comparison with the softer styles we see on the other characters. An upper-class woman was expected to wear her hair up every time she was seen in public after being formally presented to society. Gladys Russell is the only character we see have her hair regularly down throughout the season, but that's because she is not yet formally out in society. Otherwise, the only time we see characters with their hair down or in a loose braid is when they are in their private quarters.
And what about makeup?
Agnes would not likely be wearing any visible makeup because there were negative moral connotations linked to women who did. A woman of Agnes's character and social standing did not welcome those associations.
That is no excuse for risking the reputation of every lady in the room.
Coming up, we have jewelry.
Mrs. Van Reyne wears a pair of dangling earrings, which would have been very fashionable for the period. In other scenes, she also wears a brooch. Many of the characters wear neck brooches with their daytime attire. There was a range of styles that featured carved cameos, seed pearls, inlaid enamel, and even human hair. You heard me. Human hair. Mourning jewelry was a common way to commemorate the dearly departed. Often, a lock of hair would be encased in a piece of jewelry, like a brooch, and worn as an act of remembrance. Such a piece of jewelry would be appropriate for a widow like Agnes, if she had any affection for her late husband.
Ouch.
Me, with the Van Reyne money, which was not achieved at no cost to myself.
On to our next layer, boots.
High-button leather boots were the standard for daytime wear. The style prevailed throughout the late 19th and early 20th centuries as the everyday footwear choice for the working class and upper class alike. These boots extended up over the ankle and provided modesty and coverage for those perilous moments when skirts may need to be lifted. For example, when walking about the city or getting in and out of a carriage.
Who could forget the accessories?
Agnes wears this look in the comfort of her own home, but if she were to go out, there would be a few necessary accessories to complete her ensemble. First, she would need a pair of gloves, and these could be purchased at department stores. We see Marion purchase 2 pairs at Bloomingdale's, which in 1882 was located close to the Van Reyne home on 3rd Avenue and East 56th Street. A hat was required whenever a lady left the house. We see a wide array of fashionable hat styles during the charity bazaar scene. Some were shaped more like bonnets with ribbons that tied underneath the chin, and others featured more of a tall crown with a shorter upturned brim. But almost all were lavishly embellished with trimmings like ribbons and lace and feathers. When outdoors, women often carried parasols, which provided protection from the sun.
Every lady loves a good purse, right?
Purses serve as important plot devices at several points throughout the series. During this time, women became more autonomous and got to move around the city on their own and without male companions. So they needed purses so they could hold their own money and their other personal effects. Purses were also necessary for carrying calling cards. These would have been used when society women made social visits to each other's homes.
But you'll give her my card and this envelope? You'll say I called?
Of course, ma'am.
This was all part of a very strict set of etiquette that governed the upper class.
Mrs. Astor is in the hall.
What?
She wonders if you have time to see her.
So here's what Agnes would have looked like compared to what she wore in the series.
Overall, this look is mostly accurate and a great representation of fashions from the period.
So now that we've taken a look at the customs of old money, let's step into the fashion and flair of a new money ensemble. Next up, Bertha Russell's ball gown.
Bertha Russell is a wife and mother who will stop at nothing to be accepted into New York society. She is portrayed by actress Carrie Coon.
Is that from the Palazzo Borghese?
No, the Hotel de Soubise in the Marais.
We finished the gilding in the ballroom, Mrs. Russell.
No, you think you have finished the gilding, Mr. Kowalski, but nothing is finished till I decide. I don't want my old friends, I want new friends.
The Russell family bears similarities to the famous Vanderbilt family, who also made their fortune in the railroad industry. Bertha is desperate to break into high society and tries to make connections with the leading members by any means necessary.
So, now they know we're here.
Bertha Russell's character is loosely based on Alva Vanderbilt, who had a real-life face-off with Mrs. Astor in 1883 over the attendance of her ball. This is the incident that would inspire the season finale.
I gather my daughter Caroline will not now dance at your ball tonight. Indeed, she is no longer invited. Is that correct?
It is?
For the big event in the season finale, Bertha wears a ball gown, which was the most formal category of evening attire and therefore commanded the highest sum. Women spent a lot of money on clothing during the Gilded Age because appearances were everything. Upwardly mobile, nouveau riche women like Bertha Russell had a taste for the dramatic and for the avant-garde. She would have patronized the most highly regarded European fashion houses. These were the same fashion houses patronized by the old money set. However, those women were in the habit of buying the latest styles, but then keeping them in their closets for a year or two, so as to not appear too fashion-forward. Bertha Russell would not do that. While old money women tended to be more modest, nouveau riche women really wanted to show off their new wealth.
Let's draw this gown layer by layer.
Despite their differences, women of the old money and new money sets basically wore the same undergarments. Bertha would also be wearing a chemise, pantalettes, and a pair of stockings. Chemises for evening wear tended to have thinner straps because more of the chest and arms would be exposed.
You know we can't forget the corset.
The silhouette of the 1880s corset featured a narrow waistline, a rounded abdomen, and fullness at the hips. Stitched channels encased strips of boning, and this is what gave a corset its rigidity. An upper-class woman like Bertha would have a lady's maid to dress her and to maintain her daily wardrobe.
Will there be anything else, ma'am?
You tell me. Will there?
It might be better without the brooch.
It's too much? Yes, it's too much.
For the next layer, we have the bustle again.
The bustle was a fashion staple that both nouveau riche women and the old society women deemed essential for a fashionable ensemble. There are a variety of bustle types that were used to achieve posterior fullness.
Here comes the petticoat.
An evening petticoat would be similar to a daytime one, but could incorporate more ruffles to support a heavier skirt. Evening dresses typically featured a tail-like train, so a petticoat with extended length at the back would be appropriate.
And now for the main event, the ball gown.
Bertha's ball gown is very closely based on a surviving garment in the collection at the Metropolitan Museum of Art designed by the House of Worth. However, that original dress dates to about 1898, about 15 years after the show is set. So this costume is technically inaccurate. In fact, many of the paintings and fashion plates that served as inspiration for Bertha's costumes came from the years after 1882 and helps Bertha to stand out as the leading lady in the ballroom. What is accurate about this look is where it came from. The House of Worth was founded in 1858 by Charles Frederick Worth, who is widely considered to be the founding father of haute couture. There is a famous gown by the House of Worth from 1882 that also resides in the Metropolitan Museum of Art's collection, so perhaps it would have been more appropriate to recreate that look.
Perhaps. Let's get into the details.
It is festooned with extravagant silk flowers, which is pretty consistent with the other gowns that Bertha wears throughout the season.
As for Bertha's hair and makeup,
like Agnes, Bertha also only wears her hair down when in her private quarters. For the ball, she sports an elaborate updo of stacked curls, which would have been done by her lady's maid, Turner. When compared to the hairstyles worn by other women in the series, Bertha's tend to be more sculptural and decidedly modern-looking, which is very fitting for her character. Because the use of cosmetics was associated with women of ill repute, like performers and prostitutes, Bertha would have wanted to go for a more natural look, even for the evening. Society women who wore unnatural-looking makeup, like the infamous Madame X, garnered scandalous reputations, and Bertha would not have wanted to take that risk.
Now, on to jewelry.
Chokers were very fashionable for evening attire. However, Bertha would want to wear her finest, flashiest jewelry to impress her guests.
Up next, the shoes.
Silk pumps were the standard for evening wear. These could be dyed to match a dress or embroidered at the toe. The heels were curved and an appropriate height for dancing at a ball.
Well, that's all for tomorrow. Tonight for the belle of the ball.
And lastly, the accessories.
We see Bertha and the other ladies at the ball wearing opera-length gloves that extend above the elbow. These were typically light-colored and made of silk or a supple leather. A fan was a very fashionable evening accessory. We see Marion express envy over the one Bertha carries to the Academy of Music.
I envy your fan. I wish I had one so I could cover my face and look fascinating.
Bertha later gifts her one of her very own.
So we could say this look is pretty accurate.
Even though this costume isn't technically accurate for 1882, it does convey the essence of the character.
So, any final thoughts?
The costumes of the Gilded Age offer a broader visual representation of the last quarter of the 19th century, rather than a fixation on the exact year in which the show is set. The design team accurately captured the vibrant colors, sumptuous textiles, and asymmetry of the period. At the end of the day, the costumes succeeded in conveying a sense of the era, and they did their jobs in creating a clear visual distinction between these two parties within a very small slice of society. Costume designer Kasia Wolicka-Maimon heightened this divide by putting the characters that belonged to old New York in styles closer to the 1870s, while putting the nouveau riche in styles closer to the 1890s. She also took creative license with more fantastical designs, but she did appropriately place them on characters that were deemed outsiders within this society. There's a reason that films and television shows in this genre are called costume dramas, and the costumes in the Gilded Age are the stuff of dreams when it comes to this genre. Everything is luscious and sumptuous, and you get this visual delight and a look into a more glamorous past.